Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Congress Meeting.
So my role in this workshop is to provide a spatial perspective on integrated planning, and we do this by introducing a landscape approach. And in this workshop there are participants who are stakeholders or are different stakeholders of the southern Lake Tanganyika landscape. And this is partly in Zambia, partly in Tanzania. So it's a transboundary landscapes, which makes it very interesting but also very challenging if we talk about integrated planning. So there are two governance issues that we addressed here by using a landscape approach. One is the transboundary aspect. We're dealing with two different countries, so how to work across boundaries on issues such as biodiversity conservation and climate change adaptation. And the second one is that it's a multifunctional landscape. So how to truly work in an integrated manner. So that requires working across skills and across sectors. So by using a landscape approach, we encourage the participants here not to look only from their expertise, from their silo, whether it's agriculture, tourism, wildlife, but to look in a more integrated manner and to understand how these different functions in the landscape are connected and are influencing each other. So the fact that they're already here, talking to each other, applying various tools on this shared landscape is already, I think, a first step when we talk about transboundary governance.
A workshop focusing on spatial planning, and particularly from my perspective, trying to bring a legal perspective to the broader notion of integrated land use planning. It was quite an interesting insight on the first day to ask a simple question of the participants as to whom worked with the law. And only a few hands were raised as to who works with the law, which I found quite interesting because there's a realization, which I think came after a couple of days at the workshop, that most of them did work with the law or were influenced by the law. And what I hoped to have presented to them through this workshop is an understanding that the law guides a lot of what their work involves. It sets out what their authority is, creates the institutions under which they're employed. It also gives them immense powers and functions and responsibilities, particularly relating to land use planning law.
This workshop has been very informative for me. I've really enjoyed myself. To start with, I'm going to explain that the Ministry of Water Development, Sanitation and Environmental Protection is focal point institution for the Lake Tanganyika project in Mpulungu in Zambia, which is the landscape we're looking at in this workshop. So after this workshop, I've learned quite a lot of things that are going to help me in dealing with all the issues we encounter back in Lusaka in the office as we deal with Lake Tanganyika. Yes, so not being present in the landscape, the Lake Tanganyika landscape, but working with the people there. Now my mind is so open because of this workshop. I've recognized the institutions and how important the community is that side, and many other important aspects through this workshop.
And I hope through this particular workshop to illustrate some of those linkages for them, and particularly in the context of integrated land use planning law, to highlight to them the role the law plays in both the context of spatial planning instruments and land use management instruments, to think through how it guides the content and nature and form of the many spatial planning instruments which they deal with on a daily basis, how it sets out their content and form, how it sets out their legal status and the role which these spatial planning instruments and land use management instruments play, and furthermore, how it deals with issues around integration, a key issue when one's dealing with issues around integrated land use planning law. Because if the law doesn't provide the mechanisms for such integration, then we are left with land use planning laws not well integrated within the broad array of other laws which regulate what the participants deal with on a daily basis. So all in all, it was a fascinating enterprise. And when I posed that same question on the last day of the workshop, I think there was a realization that the law plays an integral role in everything the participants do relating to integrated land use planning.
So the training approaches, the training method that we used in this workshop is very participatory and very interactive. So we realized that the participants here, they have a lot of knowledge and experience on the southern Lake Tanganyika landscape. So what we did is that we provide various tools for them to better understand the different dynamics happening in the landscape, which at the same time also trigger dialogue among them. So for example, we did participatory landscape mapping to better understand the different landscape dynamics. We did stakeholder analysis, we did power analysis, and also we did an institutional analysis to see which institutions are there, what function do they have in the landscape, and how can you strengthen certain institutions needed for spatial planning or for any project intervention. And we finished by looking at climate change at the landscape. How are different climate hazards impacting the landscape, and which part of the landscape are vulnerable to climate change? Which stakeholders, which functions in the landscape, and what can we come up with? What kind of measures can we identify to integrate already in the planning part of the process?
There are a lot of issues that have become clearer to me in terms of land use planning. A lot of issues have become clearer in terms of the process, the various stakeholders that we have to involve in terms of land use planning. And it was exciting because one of the deliverables that we have in the project is to develop landscape, a plan for our project site, and it will give us that opportunity to involve as many stakeholders as possible, which we were able to identify during this workshop, who could play a role in land use planning. That is important because in terms of implementation, once all the stakeholders come on board and they're involved in the planning, then you expect better implementation because people would have been part and parcel of the planning process. So you feel when implementation, they will have owned the process and therefore they will be part of the implementation process. I would surely recommend this capacity building workshop for a lot of other people, not just for planners, but also I think in future it would be good if we incorporated the actual implementers who are on the ground, because most times they are left out and they're expected to implement a plan which somebody else has produced. So I think for the future we try by all means to incorporate a lot of these implementers so that they understand the background of the production of these land use plans.
When we came, I thought it was going to be a boring, long workshop, but to the contrary, I really had a very good time, and time has really passed. Before we know it, it's time to go back home. So thank you to all the facilitators. Then I would want to share with the meeting that our country launched our 2017 to 2021 strategic plan. And now as sectors, we are in the process of developing our strategic plan, which are supposed to be aligned to the 7th National Development Plan. Issues of biodiversity and climate change have been streamlined in the National Development Plan. So this workshop has come at a good time because most of us, the participants from Zambia, are planners. So we'll make sure as we prepare our strategic plan for the next 4 years, we'll take most of the things that we have planned here into consideration. the international agreements, the various targets, will take all those into consideration.